Fire on the Mountain, Part 15. And I didn't miss them either, except for Sean. I later learned he was killed at Roanoke toward the end of the war. He died with me owing him 2 taws and a clay, which I would gladly put on his grave today, but I could not find it. I was busier than a one-armed blacksmith, since I had to deal with the mules and horses, doubled in number, morning and night, and dinner from 11 to 3. I got out of washing up, though, since Mama had hired 2 girls. War times are flush times in the livery business. Deal was off almost every day in the valley, buying up horses and contracting for hay. I missed the old man around the stable, except with Seize Her, or any troubled horse. He was a far better hand with horses than I, since he genuinely liked and understood the beasts, and I was always faking it, finding them the only living thing dumber than wood. With Caesar gone, all I did was throw them hay and water. I never took time to rub them down or look at their hooves, though the militia and government men didn't mind and seemed to care as little about their animals as I did. These were the first strange days, great-grandson, of the war we didn't yet realize was a war. Then late one afternoon, while I was watering the horses, I heard a Tidewater voice say the word war as if it had 3 syllables, and I froze as still as a deer. I was in full view of 2 men across the barn, but if you have ever been a 12-year-old African in a white man's country, you know what it is to be invisible. Just to make sure, though, I backed up between 2 horses and started rubbing them down, which would have alarmed any more intelligent animals, since I had never laid on them with a brush in my life. Under the bellies, far off under the hayloft, I could barely see 2 pairs of English-style boots facing each other, but barn sound is funny, and I could hear their voices as if I were standing next to them. They were planning an ambush that night out the old quarry road, where they had intelligence that Brown's men were coming down nightly for supplies. From the amount of tack and horses, I figured their force was about 30 men, as big as Brown's whole army. When Deal came back, they contracted for all of our horses, leaving their own behind. I suppose one of the benefits of being in the government militia is that you subject a rented horse to fire and not your own. I was, until almost dark, getting the tack and mounts together. Meanwhile, I was burning inside. I had to tell someone. The only person I could trust, who would know what to do or who to tell, was Cricket, but he was 3 miles away at Green Gables, and it was already getting dark. I was still trying to decide what to do when Mama called me to help with the dinner spread. Something told me not to answer. It was dark by the time I got to Green Gables, out of breath all the way, and to my dismay Cricket was gone, running about everywhere. I checked down by the slough and out in the woods. There was no one else I trusted to tell. Cricket trusted the old granny woman, but I didn't trust her or anyone. Cricket had said the fire 2 weeks before had cleared things up between those who poured water on the fire and those who blowed on it. But this didn't help me, since I didn't know who had taken which side. Besides, things had changed. Nobody on the plantation seemed to want to talk to me, or I to them. I sneaked home on foot, heartsick, hating all the slaves, and surprisingly got neither a scolding nor a whipping from my mother, who thought I was coming down with something and sent me to bed. I crept up onto the corner of my loft, and maybe I was sick. I went right to sleep. It was almost dawn when I was awakened by the sound of horses. They didn't sound right. I peered out through the crack under the eave I had opened up for summer, and saw a big bay eating Mama's roses, his head not 5 feet from mine, nosing the roses, then gobbling them down. He was riderless, and his saddle had slipped down under his belly, and his back was smeared with blood. 2 other horses came up, whickering into my little field of vision, one of them dragging one leg. I heard white men hollering far away. The back door slammed downstairs, and Deal hopped into sight like a chicken, pulling on his filthy old pants, grabbing at the horses. It was like a scene from hell. The ambush had been ambushed, and the horses had come home. 6 men had been killed, and twice as many wounded. The 2 Tidewater gentlemen rode in on one mount, One of them shot in the arm, but not excited about it. I'll grant him that. Those Virginia slavers were cool customers to the end. I worked at cleaning up the horses while Deal shot too. I always wondered why he spared me that, but not the gruesome work with the boys. It must have been hard on him. Through the day the news got worse and worse as the wounded came back. Worse for them, the whites, that is. I looked at black folks with a different eye by the evening of that long and bloody day. Bloodier for Deal, since he lost 4 horses, 2 of which, ironically, the U.S. government still owes me for, since Mama was freed before she died and left her half to me. I was excited. It was clear that the raiders on the mountain had more friends, and more effective friends, than me. I delivered a plate of cornbread and side meat and beans to Mr. Pleasance up at the Planters' Hotel that night, and instead of cuffing me, as he did when he was drunk, or giving me a nickel as when he was generous drunk, he had me set it outside the door. Then he slid a nickel under the crack. For me, that nickel sliding was the true beginning of the war. Laura May Bully Jenks Hunter was a tiny little woman like a china figurine, bone white, covered with a web of fine wrinkles like crazing. She must be 90, Yasmin thought. Although she knew she was a poor judge, white people looked old to her at 60. The old woman peered at her through huge glasses, then touched her hand. Satisfied that this visitor was real, as if perhaps she had plenty of the other kind, she settled back into her wheelchair and smiled. When she smiled, powder cracked from her face and fell into her lap like snow from a shaken tree. Yasmin told her how much she'd appreciated reading the letters. It would have seemed rude to have said enjoyed. Mrs. Hunter explained that her mother had been the sister of Dr. Hunter. All the letters had come from her, since Dr. Hunter had left no heirs. Yasmin had figured out that much. Her question was, how had she gotten hold of the Emily letters? Even though it had all taken place 100 years ago, Yasmin was reluctant to ask. It seemed like prying. My father was a bully, of the Lynchburg bullies, and my husband was a Jenks, you know. But when he died, I changed my name back to Hunter. The bullies were nobody in particular, and the Jenkses were nobody at all. You know when you get old, dear, the old woman said, the past seems closer than the present. Black folks called you honey, and white folks called you dear. Yasmin had noticed that as a child, and it still was true. She herself had called Harriet honey last night when she had told her she was going to have a baby brother. Brother? Had she really said brother? Did she really think that? Did her subconscious know some secret her body hadn't yet revealed? Now looky here. The old woman was opening a little cedar box she held on her lap. She pulled out an ancient brown tintype. Here's my mother, Laura Sue Hunter, as a girl with her brother, Thomas Hunter, who wrote the letters. He left no heirs, you know. She handed the photo back to Yasmin, who studied it, looking for some sign of the young man who had heard Douglas thundering at Bethel Church. Whose best friend was a Jacobin, who was in love, did he even realize it, with a Yankee bluestocking. But the picture was too posed and dim. A Southern belle standing next to a Virginia gentleman, both completely characterless, like hollows of photos of drawings. She was a teenager, made up to look like a woman. He was a boy in his 20s, with an eager mustache, wearing a frock coat. They were standing in front of a photographer's painted backdrop of a columned house. Spanish moss and cotton fields stretching off into the distance, in a scene totally unlike the great valley of Virginia where they had lived. Yasmin's eyes were drawn back by the perspective to the tiny stylized black dots bending down between the rows. She married a bully of the Lynchburg bullies, but she was a hunter through and through, the old woman said. He, on the other hand, my uncle, he was what you might call the black sheep of the family. Wouldn't you call him the black sheep, Dr. Grissom? She smiled, and another light avalanche of white powder fell into her lap. Of course, blood is thicker than water, isn't it, dear? You color do hold to that, don't you? I beg your pardon? Yasmin sat up, startled. But Laura May Booley Jenks Hunter went on as though hard of hearing. Did you enjoy the letters? You can keep them a few more days. The old woman's fingers, fluttering on the back of Yasmin's hand, felt like a bird's claw. Yasmin let her pluck the picture back and put it into the box, then watched curious as she pulled one of the books from between the bookends. I want you to read this, dear, she said. Just be sure and have Dr. Grissom return it with the letters. She squinted, and powder whitened the back of Yasmin's hand. Which one is it? John Brown's body. Oh, yes. End of part 15.